This section, we will help the components to communicate with each other. So the very first thing that we need to know is by revisiting what is a component, because we have already discussed it in the previous sections of this course. So let us see what actually a component is. A component basically comprises of a template, a class, and some metadata. So a template is the one which is available on the view, which is visible to the user on the browser. It includes HTML, coding. Then there is class, which includes all the properties, methods that need to be implemented inside the code. And then there is metadata, which includes the information about the class, Angular, the template, selectors, everything. So that is the metadata inside the component. So this is the pictorial representation of how component A is communicating with component B using different ways. Some of the different ways in which components can communicate with each other are using input, output, template reference variable, view child, services. We will discuss all of these in the next coming parts of this section. So inside the section overview, we will discuss how to use input to help the components communicate with each other, what is the role of output for component communication, and we'll also see how to use template reference variable for component communication. In this part of the section, we will see how to use input decorator to help the components to communicate with each other. So suppose you have two components, one is a parent component and the other is called a child component, and you want some property inside the child component to be accessed from the parent component. So that's when you use input for communication between your child component and the parent component. So in this case, you have some property inside your child component and you want this property to be accessed inside your parent component with the help of this input decorator. So let's try what we are trying to say by implementing it. So coming to Visual Studio Code to execute our program, we have already created a child component. Our component is called child.component.ts, and inside the component field we have given the selector name to be app-child. We also need to give a template here. So inside the template, let's simply write hi as of now. And using interpolation, let us take the name of some property. Let's say the property is called message, and here that property is initialized, which is of string type. We don't have the value of this property yet. So as of now, we have created our child component. We have given the selector name, we have given the template definition also. Inside the heading tags, we have interpolated the message property, which here is of string type. Now when we go to our app component, which is the parent component, here we already have selector name inside it. We need to import the child component here. So inside the template, let's remove it as of now. Inside the template, let's simply take the tag of our child component, which is called app-child. It's better to copy it from the child component. If not, you can simply write it manually here. Now when we go to the class of our parent component, let's take a property here. Let's say it's called parent message, which is again of string type, and it has a value which says hello, I am parent. Just to specify that this property belongs to the parent component, we have taken this property here. So before calling this child component, let's take another heading tag here, which simply interpolates the value of the parent message and close the tag. So now on the view we should get the parent message, which is hello, I'm parent, and after that we should go to the child component. Looking at the child component, we have this property which gets displayed here, but as of now this property has no value. Now we want that this property should get its value from the parent component. So to do that, I'll take a button. So to do that, I need to use the input decorator. That is what our task is in this video. So I'll take input decorator here. Now this message should get its value from the other component. So going to my parent component now, I'll take another property here. Let's say child message, which is again of string type, and it says hello, I am passed from parent. Now the last step in the process of using input for component communication is using this property inside the tag, that is the selector of our child component. So I go here, I need to use property binding now. Let's see what is the name of our property. The name is message, so I copy it from here and I go again to my parent component, put the name of my property inside property binding and put it equal to the name which we have given the property here, that is child message. So I put this inside double quotes. Now it says that when you go to child component, there's some property which is called message. It should get its value from child message, which is located inside parent component. This is the whole role of input decorator. Now let's save our project and compile it and see the results. So now looking at the results after compiling our program, let's go to the browser to check what's on the view. So localhost, this is the name of our project, and yes, this is the message that we got from the parent component, whereas this is the one that we got from the child component using the input property. Using output for component communication. So do you ever want your component to communicate with other component by emitting an event to that component? Well, that is what we use output for. So there is a component B, and there is some event inside that. You want that on the click of that event or on the operation of that event, you want that it should go to the other component and execute there. So that's when we'll be using output for component communication. Now the syntax for using output for component communication is @output, then the object name, which should be equal to new. This new keyword should be used, and then event emitter. So now inside Visual Studio Code, let's go to our child.component.ts, and here let's take an object, let's say it's called message, and equate it equal to new event emitter. This is the syntax of using output for component communication, and we need to take this decorator output in front of this object message like this. Now let's take a function which says messaged, and inside that let's take a counter. Before that, let's initialize the value of counter property to 0, and here let's say this dot counter should be equal to this dot counter plus 1. So we want this message to do this increment for us, right? So after this, what we need to do is we want this to emit the value of this counter to the other component. So using our object that is called message, this dot message dot emit the value of the counter, that is this dot counter. So now with the help of this object and event emitter, we emit the value of this counter to the other component, that is our parent component. We'll see how. Before that, inside the template of our component here, let's take a button which says click me and close it here. So we want that on the click of this button, remember this is event binding that we studied earlier. Using event binding, we say that on the click of this button, we want it to call this function messaged. Yeah. So now, after having completed our child component, we need to go to our parent component, and here let's see how to use the output functionality. Let us remove this line, and now here I want to take an event, let's say display counter, and it has some argument, let's say count. We want this to display the value to us on the browser, so let's say alert. You can also use console.log, but just for the sake of convenience, let's say alert this dot count. Yeah. Now to use it, we need to tell our app child that there is something as an object which is getting passed here. So again, we'll use property binding, the name of our object that we created in the child component message, and this needs to be equal to the function that we just created, which is called display counter, and the argument that needs to be passed here always remains the same, that is the sign, and after that event, like this. Let's just save it now, look for the results. So now that we have our parent component also set in here, that is this object does event binding, which leads to this function which says display counter, and here this takes the value of count from the child component, wherein this gets incremented every time the function is clicked. So let us go to the browser to see the results. Okay, it's finally compiled successfully, and let's go to the browser now and type localhost. Let's see. Okay, we have a button which says click me. When I click on it, it gives me the count of 1. Let me try clicking on it again. Okay, the incrementation has happened. Let me try again. 3. So great. It's incrementing as every time when we click on the button. So that's what the output decorator does. In this part of the section component communication, we will see how to use a template reference variable for communication among the components. A template reference variable is generally used when you have to give reference to a DOM element, a component, directive, a web component. This is done using a variable which is common anywhere throughout the program, throughout the application. A template reference variable is created using a hash symbol. Now we'll go to Visual Studio Code to understand it in simple terms by implementing it. So to begin with, the very first step is that on the browser you want a text box which asks you what's your name, and that name variable is used throughout the application anywhere. So you go to your app component, that is your parent component, and inside the template of it, let us remove this as of now. Yeah, inside this you create a text box. Let us take a placeholder which says what is your name, and after this you take this template reference variable here which is called name. So now this is your template reference variable. We are going to use this particular keyword, that is name, throughout the application to get this displayed. The next step is that we also want a button on the click of which we want that it should call some function. Let's take any function name as of now. So it calls this function display, and inside that we pass our template reference variable, and it says, the button says what is the name, and let's close our button. like this. Now for the next step, we need to go to the class of our app component here. So the function that we took in the template, we need to declare that function here. So let's say display, and the property is called name. Now the name property here is not of type string. Always remember that whenever you take any property through the input on the view, that is always of the type HTML input element. So here this name property is of type HTML input element, and this function needs to display this value. So to take that, let's alert the value using alert, and let's say name dot value. So we'll have to write name dot value because this is how any attribute, any property of HTML input element is displayed. Semicolon. Right here we are done creating a template reference variable. Let's see the results now. So we just compiled our program successfully. Let's go to localhost to see the results now. Okay, so we have got a text box which asks us what is your name, and there's a button also. So let me say Nishu Goyal, and when I press the button it should alert me giving me the name. Exactly, that is exactly what we wanted. So this is the use of template reference variable.